Hope you are all doing well. I am Dr. V.D. Bhatt and welcome to the Essentials of Inorganic Chemistry. I am discussing a chapter entitled Postulates of Quantum Mechanics, and this is the second talk in the series. In today's talk, I intend to introduce to you the first part of the second postulate of quantum mechanics. I shall also be discussing the concept of operator in quantum mechanics, and later on I will explain you what are the linear operators. Before starting the discussion on second postulate of quantum mechanics, I would like to give you the solutions to the questions that I asked you in the previous lecture. I asked you three questions. Actually, I provided you three functions with limits, and you are supposed to find out whether these functions are well behaved in the prescribed limits or not. The key to checking the acceptance of this wave functions is that it has to pass three tests. The function has to remain finite, single valued and continuous throughout the limits provided. So let us take the first one. The first one was sine inverse x in the limits -1 to 1. Now this is an inverse function, which means that you get the values, the x stands for the values of the angles at which the value of sine x turns out to be -1, between -1 to 1. Let us take the extreme limit, say for example 1, because that is a simple number. Now we know that sine is a function for which at x is equal to 0, you have 0, x is equal to pi by 2, the sine x becomes 1. Then x is equal to 2, at x is equal to pi, it becomes again 0. Then at x is equal to 3 by 2, 3 pi by 2, it becomes -1, and x is equal to 2 pi, it becomes 0. And now this keeps on repeating. So when you say that sine inverse x is equal to 1, and if you are asked the value of x, then you will be able to give several values. It can be pi by 2, it can be 2 pi plus pi by 2, it can be 4 pi plus pi by 2, it can be 6 pi plus pi by 2, and so on. Which means that this function is not single valued, it is multi-valued. There are so many angles at which the sine inverse x turns out to be equal to 1, and this is not a characteristic of a well-behaved wave function. It has to be single valued, it cannot be multi-valued, and therefore I will say that sine inverse x in the limits -1 to 1 is not a well-behaved wave function. Let us take the second one, e raised to minus x in the limits 0 to infinite. I will say that this is an acceptable wave function as it remains finite, single valued and continuous in the entire limit that has been provided to us. Now let me first go to the function number 3, and then I will explain you both of them together. In the third function, what I have done is the function is same, e raised to minus x, but I have changed the limits, and then my answer is that this function is not acceptable as e raised to minus x diverges towards minus infinity. So when we keep on decreasing the value of x in the minus range, then you will see that the e raised to minus x will diverge towards infinity, and therefore it will become infinite, and the function has to remain finite, single valued and continuous to be acceptable. Now I will show you using this graphical calculator how to check the properties of your wave functions. See, what I am doing is I will use a function, miscellaneous function, exponential. So I have got exp, and here I will put minus x, and then I am getting the graph of this function. What I can see from this graph is, let me take you back to this question. First we are taking the e raised to minus x in 0 to infinity, 0 to infinity. So this is our graph, it starts from here and it goes like this. You can see that the graph is a continuous graph, so that is not an issue with us. It is single valued, that also is very clearly seen. And is it finite throughout the range? Yes, it is finite, because even though it is approaching, as we keep on increasing the value of x, it is approaching 0. It is not becoming infinite, and 0 is a finite number. So e raised to minus x in the range 0 to infinity is an acceptable wave function. But when you take the same e raised to minus x in the range 0 to minus infinity, then again you will see that it remains single valued, it is continuous. Here we are going towards minus infinity. So it is single valued, it is continuous, But this time when you keep on increasing the negative values of x, then you see that this graph is moving towards infinity. So at at x is equal to minus infinity, this value will become infinite, and therefore it is not finite, and therefore it is not an acceptable wave function. So these are the solutions to the questions asked in the previous lecture. Now we come to the today's agenda. Today we are going to discuss, as I said, the first part, or the part A of the second postulate of quantum mechanics. And the statement of this second postulate of quantum mechanics, the first part of the second postulate of the quantum mechanics is, there corresponds a linear operator in quantum mechanics for every operator in classical mechanics. So as such, the statement is quite short, but perhaps it involves a term which is new to us, and that is linear operator. If you understand the meaning of linear operator, then it becomes really easy for us to understand the part A of the second postulate. So what I will do is, I will try to explain you the meaning of the term linear operator. First I will split it into two. What is linear operator, and before that we will understand what is an operator. So we come here, operator. In order to understand operator, you need to understand one more term, that is observable. In quantum mechanics, when we say observable, then we are referring to any measurable property like position, energy and momentum, etc. All these properties are in general. As I said, they are called observables. So with this definition of observable, now we define operator. What is operator? Operator is a symbol that we have so many times encountered in general mathematics and arithmetic, etc. Like plus, minus, multiplication, division, etc. What does it do? It is a symbol that instructs a process to be performed on a function. Say when I write 1 plus 1, then I am writing three letters, 1, then plus, and then 1. The first and the third letters, they are the numbers. But between these two numbers, there is a symbol that is called an operator. So whenever you find that plus kind of operator, you understand that you have to add the numbers provided to the left and the right of that function, and you get the result as equal to 2. So that is an operator in general, in mathematics, in your classical mechanics also. There are some more operators also. I will give you an example of that. Say sometimes you write dy by dx. So you know that is about showing a derivative. While you write dy by dx, then this is consisting of two parts. It is a d by dx, which is called operator, and then you have function fx is equal to y on which this operator operates. So you say that d by dx of fx is represented as dy by dx. Now in order to make it more clear, let us take an example. Instead of fx is equal to y, if fx is equal to x square, then how do we operate this operator d by dx on fx? So d by dx on fx is equal to d by dx of x square, because fx is equal to x square. And now if you know the derivative, then you will say that d by dx of x square is equal to 2x. And thus in this case you will be able to say finally that d by dx of fx is equal to 2x. So that is in general an operator in mathematics, and then you can say in classical mechanics also. But I will have to make a large statement over here that quantum mechanical operators are different than the operators in classical mechanics. Classical mechanics is the Newtonian mechanics, or the mechanics of the large objects, of a cricket ball, of a football, etc. But quantum mechanics, it is the mechanics, or it's the science of microscopic material, where you have very low mass and where you have de Broglie hypothesis, where you have Heisenberg's uncertainty principle operating on it. So here you will have operators like classical mechanics, but they are slightly different. They are not the same. So in order to understand some of the operators in quantum mechanics, let us do one exercise. We have to recall the Schrodinger equation that we perhaps most of you would have learned, because I expect that a student trying to learn quantum mechanics of this level has at least studied the your de Broglie hypothesis, your Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, and finally the derivation of Schrodinger wave equation, at least in traveling in one dimension. So If you recall the Schrodinger equation for a wave traveling in one dimension, it was like this: d square psi by dx square plus 8 pi square me upon h square psi is equal to 0. And in this equation, you know that this E stands for kinetic energy of the particle. This is the kinetic energy. E is the kinetic energy. This equation can also be written as minus h square upon, see what I am doing is, I will express this Schrodinger equation in terms of E. So I will bring this E on the right hand side and all the remaining things on the left hand side. So it becomes like this: minus h square upon 8 pi square m d square psi by dx square is equal to E psi. And then there is the practice of presenting this h by 2 pi using the symbol h cut. So in place of h square upon 4 pi square, I will put h cut square, and therefore the equation now looks like this: minus h cut square upon 2m d square psi by dx square is equal to E psi. So this is your equation for the kinetic energy, that E is equal to, this kinetic energy E or Ke is equal to minus h square upon 2m d square psi by dx square. We keep this highlighted and we move ahead so that we can derive two operators simultaneously. Now again we remember that when I write E over here, I am talking about the kinetic energy. Why it is only kinetic energy? The answer you must have studied earlier, that when a wave is traveling only in one dimension, then the potential energy remains constant. Potential energy is the energy because of position. It remains constant, and for mathematical simplicity it is treated as 0, and therefore we assume that the particle has only the kinetic energy. Now let us come to the equation for kinetic energy in your classical mechanics. The classical mechanics, that is the mechanics of the large objects. We have already studied so many times that the equation for kinetic energy is 1/2 mv square. So that is shown over here. Ke is equal to mv square upon 2, that is 1/2 mv square. And if I multiply the numerator and denominator by m, the same equation will now appear like m square v square upon 2m. And then I will argue that m into v, mass into velocity, is your momentum, and therefore m square into v square is p square. Momentum is represented by p. So in place of m square v square, I am putting p square, and the denominator remains as such. So now I can write that p square upon 2m, which is kinetic energy in your classical mechanics, is equal to the kinetic energy, the equation for kinetic energy obtained in your Schrodinger equation. So p square upon 2m is equal to minus h cut square upon 2m d square psi by dx square. And then if I equate this in terms of p square, that is, I cancel out this 2m terms. So p square is equal to minus h square into h cut square into d square psi by dx square. Now this appears to be simple, but this is not a simple situation. This is like an expression where you have x square is equal to minus 1. See, here your symbol minus and here your square. So if your x square is equal to minus 1 or minus 2 or any constant, and then you are required to find out the value of x, that is very difficult. You cannot find out, because no square of no number can ever be negative. Do you remember any number whose square is negative? No, it is not possible, because even if you take the square of a negative number, it will become positive. Say minus 3. What is the square of minus 3? It is plus 9. The square of plus 3 is also plus 9. So the square is always plus. But if you have an equation like this, t square is equal to minus h cut square d square psi by dx square, and you have to find out the value of t, then you have to use the concept of complex number. Here we use an imaginary number where I square is equal to minus 1. I square, this is your imaginary number. So when you put I square is equal to minus 1, then what happens? This p square becomes equal to minus I h cut d by dx multiplied by minus I h cut d by dx. I am dividing this, that's the term of p square, into two parts. So see, minus minus becomes plus, and I into I becomes minus, because I square is equal to minus 1, and then d by dx into d by dx becomes d square by dx square. So that is how I will be able to say that the linear momentum p is equal to minus I h cut d by dx. So now you have got expressions for your this kinetic energy, and you have got expression for this linear momentum. But this linear momentum in classical mechanics is generally given by an equation m into v, and this linear momentum can have three components: px, py, pz, x component, y component, and z component. So if I show the x component of the linear momentum in classical mechanics, I will say that px is equal to m into vx, the x component of the velocity. So this term in quantum mechanics is now shown by minus I h cut d by dx, because we have already derived an operator for x component of linear momentum in quantum mechanics. If it was classical mechanics, it would have been very simple, px is equal to m into vx, but in quantum mechanics your operator is now p cap x is equal to minus I h cut d by dx. What does this mean? It means that if you have a wave function and if you want to find out the linear momentum of that wave function in x or the x component of the linear momentum of that wave function, then you will use an operator called p cap x, which is equal to minus I h cut d by dx. And what does it do? You have to perform the first derivative of that wave function and then multiply it by minus I h cut. And what you get? You get the x component of the linear momentum of that quantum mechanical system. In the same way, in quantum mechanics, you have already derived, here you can see, an operator for kinetic energy. In quantum mechanics, the symbol for the operator for kinetic energy is Tx, and it is now represented by minus h cut square upon 2m d square by dx square. So again, if you have a wave function and you want to find out the kinetic energy of that, and what you have to do? You have to perform double derivative of that wave function with respect to x and then multiply it by minus h cut square upon 2m, and what you get? You get the x component of the kinetic energy of that wave function. So I hope that is clear to you. We move little ahead. Now if you have an object of mass m which is undergoing a circular motion on a plane, only in one plane. So what happens? You have an object of mass m and you have a circular motion, and therefore the radius of that circle is equal to r, and that is r is a vector, mass is your scalar quantity, and then the direction of the motion or the velocity vector is always tangential. When this object of mass m moves on the circular path, then at each and every point you know that the direction of the velocity will be on its tangent, and this angular momentum is now defined as L is equal to, the symbol is L, is equal to mass multiplied by velocity multiplied by the radius of the circle formed because of the circular motion. And then this angular momentum will have three components: the x component, the y component, and the z component. And it has been found that the x component of the angular momentum can be presented as Lx, which is equal to y times the z component of the linear momentum minus z times the y component of the linear momentum. In the same way, Ly is equal to, what is Ly? It is the y component of the angular momentum, and it is equated as z times x component of the linear momentum minus x times z component of the linear momentum, and so on. But now we have already derived an equation for the linear momentum. If you recall, it was px is equal to minus I h cut d by dx. So for having the operator for angular momentum, what we are going to do is we will simply substitute this p's, this linear momentum, by its operator, and then you will be able to convert it into an operator for angular momentum in quantum mechanics. This is symbolized by Lx, the x component of angular momentum in angular momentum. So that this will be equal to minus I h cut, that is common. Then your ypz minus zpy has to be represented as y into d by dz minus z into d by dy. So this is our new operator for the angular momentum for quantum mechanics. This one was for the classical mechanics, and this way you can then have Ly and Lz and so on. By doing these three exercises, you might have understood that we can actually make infinite number of operators. But then the operators that correspond to some observable have to be Hermitian operators. This is a big statement, and this is a very important statement. Perhaps the statement may not be very much meaningful to you at this point because you don't understand the meaning of the term Hermitian operators. But just remember it that the operators that correspond to observables. What are observables? The measurable properties like position, energy, momentum, etc. that can change. They have to be Hermitian operators. So what happens if you have created thousands of operators, out of which some do not correspond to any observable? Then what will happen? You will operate that operator on the function and you will get some value, but that value will have no meaning because you don't know that to which observable that value corresponds to, and therefore you actually don't need to create so many operators. So with this introduction on operators, I would now like to explain you the linear operators. So straight away I will give you a definition of the linear operators, the mathematical definition. It says that an operator A cap operating on two functions f1x and f2x, the addition of two functions f1x and f2x, because I have shown the bracket, it means that operator A cap operates on the addition of f1 and f2x, and if you find that it is same or it is equal to the operator operating on individually these two functions f1x, first it will operate on f1x, then it will operate on f2x, and then you add them, and if this both LHS, that is left hand side and the right hand side, come to be same, then you will be able to say that the operators are linear operators. In this equation C1 and C2 are constants, so it doesn't carry much meaning over here. So in that case, if this equality is maintained, you will say that operator A cap is a linear operator. Now, in order to understand this in a better sense, let me give you some examples. The derivative operator, that is d by dx, and the integration operator, that is integration dx, they are linear operators. Whereas if you take the case of square operator or the square root operator, then both of them are not linear operators. I will explain you how the square operator is not a linear operator. Say you have two functions fx1 and fx2. If fx1 is equal to a and fx2 is equal to b, then fx1 plus fx2 square, this is the operator, is equal to a plus b square. Now this a, you know that this a plus b square is equal to a square plus 2ab plus b square, but it cannot be equal to a square plus b square. So you will say that this equation is not satisfied in case of the square operator. In the same way, the square root operator will also not give us this kind of associative functionality. But when you go to the derivative or the integration operators, you know that the d by dx of a plus b is always equal to dA by dx plus dB by dx, and therefore this derivative is a linear operator, and in the same way the integration is also a linear operator. Now, in the light of understanding the concept of observable, the concept of operators, the concept of linear operators, let us again read the first part of the second postulate of quantum mechanics, and this will be, I suppose, very clear to you. There corresponds a linear operator in quantum mechanics for every operator in classical mechanics. So you have operators for different properties in classical mechanics. In the same way, you will have operators in quantum mechanics for different observables, and each of these operator will be linear, which means that it will satisfy this equation. So that is the second postulate of quantum mechanics. That is rather the first part of the second postulate of quantum mechanics. Now I will again give you some homework. A question: are linear momentum and angular momentum operators linear operators? Try to find out. Goodbye till we meet again. Thank you so much.